Hello and welcome to a guide to remote work during COVID-19. This is your host, Dion Hinchcliffe, VP and Principal Analyst with Constellation Research. We have a lot of material to go through today. We would like you to share your questions. We'll have a lengthy Q&A session at the end. I'll be addressing folks on the screen. I'm going to pause my video when I go through the slides so you can see everything. But then I'll bring my video back on and I'll take your Q&A. We'd like you to use the chat function of Zoom to put your questions in any time, starting now. We'll pick select questions and try and get through as many as we can to talk about how you're preparing for remote work, what issues you're running into, any of the topics of the day related to this. We also have a hashtag coronavirus BizHacks. You'll see that on every slide. You'll also see my Twitter hashtag on every slide. I would love for you to share this conversation online. I'll jump in later and we'll continue the conversation online because we're still learning what works and what doesn't work. I've been canvassing CIOs, heads of digital workplace, collaboration leads for what they're experiencing, and I'll be summarizing that soon. So welcome. This came from a ZDNet post that I wrote, I think, was it last weekend, the week before last, exploring what can we do with technology now that we're all suddenly remote. So that's the topic of the session today. So we're clearly in the midst of a global crisis, and the COVID-19 situation is rapidly changing day by day, even hour by hour. I use Google News to track all the things that are happening, but we don't really have very good sources of information. And so the challenges for us as leaders for our organizations or as workers is now that many of us, businesses, schools, other organizations, governments are being impacted by a steady stream of new cases requiring us to isolate ourselves. It's leading to mandatory work from home, learn from home, etc. home policies. And so organizations have to now take rapid and often dramatic action to avoid disruptions and big hits to their productivity and to their customer experience. So here are what we believe are the key first steps from the very basics on what organizations can do to help their workers be more productive. The challenges, though, are pretty significant. We don't know how long this crisis will last, so it's hard to say if we need to be investing in this for the long term, or if we can just get by doing the least we can, the least responsible thing that we can. The worst case, though, is probably home quarantines that could last months. And so I would advise that's the minimum bar to prepare for. And I say minimum bar because you really have to plan for that's the most impactful scenario. Getting and keeping workers productive will be the challenge, especially in two cohorts: workers who are not already working remotely and organizations that have never had remote work as a policy or a reality. Although every organization usually has some remote work capability, it's being taxed to its maximum. I've been hearing from CIOs and heads of digital workplace and so on that they are scrambling madly to expand capacity at the very least. And I would argue that there's lots more that has to be done because remote work was largely done by our most skilled workers, our most technical workers who are used to doing it. And now everybody has to do it, or at least in most organizations. So the challenge is in ramping up the ability to conduct remote work, deploying the supporting technologies, which we'll cover in great detail in this webinar. Building the skills of workers. You can't just change the operating environment without also helping the people adapt to that new reality. And the new reality is remote work requires skills that are different than what we use when we're in the office working in person. And it helps to have a supporting culture. Remote workers in field offices are famous for being neglected because if you're not in the conversations that matter and you're not walking the hallways, not overhearing things, you're disconnected. Not just feeling disconnected, but you actually are not getting the information you need to perform at your best. So how do we create a culture that makes up for that as we work remotely? So we want to make remote work as productive, and I would argue you could make it more productive than in-office work. So we'll talk about that in coronavirus biz hacks here. So the way I framed this up is we have 4 basic strategies for remote work that have to be tackled roughly in this order, because the first order of business is to get the foundation in place so people can do it at all. Right? So that's strategy 1, create a safe and effective foundation for remote digital access. And really the challenge is not the effective part for the foundation, it's the safe part. It's very easy to do something wrong to make enterprise information unsecure when people are working from home or working from cafes or wherever they're going to be, although increasingly will be in isolation. We'll cover all those details in a moment. Strategy 2, provide access to the apps, right? The productivity tools, the line of business systems, the communications and collaboration tools in particular. So that can be easy or challenging depending on the type of organization you are. The short version is if you've been moving to cloud and software as a service or online apps, you're in better shape, but we all have work to do. So once you've got the worker connected to your business remotely and they can use your IT systems and the applications that they use to get their work done, then you can get started. You have basic capability. You still won't necessarily have effectiveness, though. And that's where the next 2 strategies really come into play. And you have to develop and then continue cultivating effective remote working skills. And again, these are a little bit different than what we've been doing normally. When we'll explore those in that section of this webinar, what that difference looks like. And then we have to start shifting our culture to make it, to proactively foster a remote working culture and mindset. And that will fix a lot of the gaps that we currently see in remote work. And I believe it will drive new levels of performance. So there's a lot of evidence that digital collaboration tools, for example, or we see things like work coordination platforms, can dramatically improve productivity far beyond the levels that we see when we're working traditionally. So there's new ways of working that are better, but they require a new culture, and not a brand new culture, but they require a shift in what you're doing and how the mindset inside your organization. So one of the real challenges with remote work is that we have not really put an emphasis on usability, on simplicity for our business systems, because we require first that it has the features that we need, that it comes from a trusted vendor that won't suddenly disappear and put our business at risk. And so usability has been usually number 3, number 4, or a very distant requirement in our systems. And that's really hurt us. We've seen now the possibility, the amazing advances in the consumer tech world have shown us the big gap that we have. And if we're going to push everyone in the digital channels, we can't give them complex, hard to use systems. We're going to take significant hits on our productivity because we really want to move people remotely, but not lose anything. We don't want to disrupt what we're doing, and we don't want to have a gap in our existing levels of effectiveness. But the chances are, if you don't spend time on this, and we traditionally haven't, by the way, in IT, and I'm an IT person, so I'll criticize IT a few times here in this webinar, but that's okay. So the recommendation is pay special attention to the average worker. Will they easily be able to use your solution, right? Can they access the span of complexity and user experience that they need to be effective, right? So not just productive, right? You can be productive doing the wrong thing, but effective is the most important thing. Put a strong emphasis on tools that are simple, straightforward, and just work. And there are options now. We didn't necessarily have a large range of options 5 years ago, but enterprise apps now come in a wide variety of usability, and especially the remote working tools. Make it easy. VPNs, we'll talk about what a VPN is and why it's important, are often complicated, or it's easy to blow your leg off. And that's what we want to avoid. And how do we actually make sure that we do this right? Do lab testing right now. Set aside a place and wherever your locations are, get your top workers and personas in there. Get the millennials, get the tech skeptics, get the tech aficionados, what we call the empty quarter, the older people who didn't grow up in the digital world. Get them all in using this remote work solutions that you have, and see how, have them tell you what they think about it. Watch what they do. Right, so this is something we don't do because it takes time, it takes effort when we just want people to use the tools. But the risks in not doing this is quite significant, which is why there's advertisements up front. Your support costs for remote work will soar. You will have less to show for what you've done in terms of preserving productivity, and you might even face a productivity crisis as workers spend more of their time trying to get their work done and trying to get your solution to work. So please take this to heart. When I've seen organizations, and they tend to be best in class organizations in terms of performance, spend extra time ensuring that the quality of the experience for the worker is there in remote work and really pays off. So enough about that. So strategy one, you gotta digitally enable remote work. So that requires a few fundamental things that you'd be surprised that often aren't in place. So you need this this set of capabilities: internet access wherever they are. We'll talk about what that means specifically. They have to have devices that can be secured. That's going to be your biggest challenge and largest expense of this entire operation in remote work, is getting those devices in place. Some organizations will be in a really good stance for this and already have everybody has a laptop that they can take home. That's great. But there are many organizations that they haven't provided laptops. They still have desktops and so on. You have to secure this. This is going to create an enormous opportunity, a huge target area for bad actors to take advantage of all of these new remote work companies or just learning how to secure this. You have to make it secure. It's going to be a target. It'll be a systematic target for bad actors. And then I'll give you some professional tips from having enabled remote work and developed digital workplace strategies for some of the world's largest organizations. There are some hard-won lessons learned. Little things, minor expenses that can really maximize the experience that often people think that you can do with that. But we'll cover those. So internet access, that's the fundamental requirement to work remotely. You've got to have it. And while many workers have it, a surprisingly significant number still don't, especially in rural areas. They often either have very, very poor internet access, and our urban areas are surrounded by exurbs and suburbs where there's surprisingly poor internet access. So you'll end up creating this digital divide if you don't proactively address this. And compounding the issue is that whole families are now suddenly working and learning from home, or soon will be. And this creates significant challenges for video meetings in particular because of the high bandwidth they use, right? And most of the meeting tools default to high definition. So to get around this, even though it seems like it should be a solved problem, it isn't. When I've been involved in remote work strategies, you have to pay particular attention to surveying who is a have and who is a have not, based on what your workers will need. So you have to know what bandwidth they're going to need to begin with. And verify your capacity for it. One of my favorite anecdotes is a company that spent tens of millions of dollars on HD video conferencing and then rolled it out and got everyone to successfully adopt it. But it so completely choked the networks of all their downtown offices. They were in multiple large buildings all across this one metropolitan area. And their networks went down because suddenly everyone was doing, 2, 4, 8-way HD video conferencing calls by the thousands. You have to verify your own capacity to handle this. Can you do it? And can they do it? So I'm calling this the remote work checkup. Everyone needs the remote work checkup on the basics like this. So provide a simple way for a worker to test if they have enough bandwidth and then multiply the number of people at home. And need to be prepared to offer hotspots and or stipends to upgrade connections for when people who don't have the connectivity. And get around a lot of this, just advise workers to hold voice-only meetings. Yeah, we're going to get, the point of video is that it returns some of that human connection. But if the capacity isn't there, then the short answer for now is to hold voice-only meetings, right? That's your fallback. I was talking to a lot of folks this week. Even residents in Silicon Valley are telling me that even with their best connection, that two people working from home can't video conference simultaneously. So this is a real issue, even in our best connected regions of the country. So spend time working on doing that remote work checkup. Then you need the devices. Sufficient devices will be the largest single issue and costliest remote work issue for some organizations if you haven't been remote working. You have to quickly assess if you can effectively secure workers' own devices. That's the best option, really. The cheapest, fastest option is to say, can we take laptops, tablets, and phones that workers already have and put the apps that they need and store business data on them? That's the big question. Can you do it? Well, we'll provide some means for making that possible. Otherwise, you have to rent, lease, or buy what workers will need, and do it quickly, because the daily cost of workers that are inactive or ineffective is quite significant. So, and this will be probably one of the longest polls in your effort, making sure that everybody has parity with their office situation. And then this brings us to the great VPN question. So many people have heard the word VPN, but they're not sure what it is. I have the simplest possible diagram on the right. And basically, it's a secure digital pipe through the cloud between the worker's device or home network, that's that laptop in the corner, to the servers that you have either in the cloud or in your data center. And that's secure pipe. As VPN, that's what it does. It makes it highly secure. VPNs, if they're designed right, cannot yet be compromised by the bad guys. That's the whole point. And so for most of the era of remote working, the virtual private network was needed to make it safe to connect remote workers to high value internal IT assets. If a hacker can gain access to that laptop while the VPN connection is active, then they have free reign on the other side of the network to whatever that worker has access to. That's the issue. Now, many organizations have largely moved their IT to software as a service, that's online applications, or the cloud. They'll have less impact when shifting to remote work, but most organizations haven't made that shift. Right? That's actually a minority, except on the coast. There are a kaleidoscope of options available for VPNs. I'll show you some of them. And the issues are complex, especially for large organizations. And if you suddenly need it, sorting through them is quite complicated. You probably already have VPN access in some part of your organization at the very least, and if not as a formal policy. But now it needs to be greatly beefed up. And actually, I would say if you don't have a VPN today, you might be able to avoid it altogether. There are now faster, simpler options. We'll explore what those are. So this is from a CNET article. I picked that because I write for ZDNet, and they also are part of CNET. This is an example of some of the top solutions, but look at that list for the other ones, and you can see that some of the measurement categories. How many servers do they have? Right, that often route the traffic to keep it secure. They route it to their own servers. You have to do geography testing if you're a global company, by the way. You have to test to make sure that VPN isn't being blocked by that particular company or country, which happens often. I travel around the world and my VPNs often stop working. I have to use a different one or try a different server. So you have to do geography testing if you're going to go to the VPN option, make sure every worker actually can get access if they have it. They'll also need probably a virtual desktop, unless you have nothing but native applications, or even if you do have native applications, you don't want to install tons of them on that worker's computer or suddenly have to install dozens of applications. So the virtual desktop allows a screen that basically runs a virtual computer somewhere, all right, in a data center or in the cloud. And there is a type of them, the type of solution on virtual desktop that's called all-in-one anywhere access. And here's some examples here. Citrix has a good model of virtual apps and desktops. They can deliver apps and a desktop to any device with high security. It's very popular, 100 million users worldwide. I've used it, recommended. It's not the same as having a native desktop, but it's pretty good. These days, it's quite good. BlackBerry's back. They have a digital workplace. This is supposed to be the easiest yet most secure way to use any managed or unmanaged device to quickly access apps and files anywhere they are. And then probably the leading solution for smaller businesses is TeamViewer. Again, it's an all-in-one solution. You don't need a VPN. You can just use TeamViewer and you can get access to everything at work on any kind of device. And so these are the fundamental ways to get people connected over the internet to assets, to the actual networks at work, servers at work, applications at work, desktops at work, and so on. And if you're going to need a remote work policy, if you don't have one, and if you do have one, you're going to have to really upgrade it. You can often start if you need to go fast, because we do right now. Everyone's suddenly remote. Get your VPN policy, use it as the base, and then add in all the other things for a rounded out remote work policy. I'll show you some toolkits later that have a lot of this work done for you, but I have a minimum here on what you'll need to do. By the way, yes, there's a question that came in. Will these slides be available on SlideShare? Yes, we'll post them shortly after this session. And you can see my Twitter account down there, or you can go to the Constellation R Twitter handle. You'll see links to the presentation there. There's a lot of other hard work that has to be done from a governance perspective to make remote work happen. And you'll need to backfill these. You're not going to solve all of them. Because you're suddenly remote right now. You have to get people productive and effective. And so there's some things. I have a list of assessment points, vulnerability evaluations, all sorts of different controls that you'll need to put in place. Popular, what's called a no logs policy that creates all, VPNs create all sorts of trails that can identify high value assets and make them targets. So work with your chief information security officer, your chief data officer, and HR, who's going to have to make the policy enforceable and formalized and make sure everyone signs off on it. They'll do all that work for you to mature your remote work governance. But you do this after the fact. You have to get remote first because there's an imperative. Again, the daily cost of having ineffective workers is very costly to your brand, your customer experience, and to your projects and so on. There's also some really neat accessories that I've discovered along the way. One, again, some of these may seem obvious to those in the technology industry, but you have to understand that everyone's going remote work. So this whole thing's aimed at what are we going to do to baseline everyone. A lot of laptops or people don't have a good webcam at home, and it has to be part of your remote work checkup. 720p is the minimum acceptable resolution for any quality results, but that's standard now. But you still have to check. You'd be surprised at the range. There are people out there with 11-year-old laptops that they've been officially given for work. Another thing that people surprisingly don't have, even if they have headphones, are often not good enough to do work with. And a headset is important. Although some tools, I'm using Zoom without a microphone right now. You're listening to me with no microphone, and I sound great. That's the software is so good. It's the exception. If I had other people, if I had a small apartment in New York with my spouse sitting next to me, it would be much more disruptive. Headphones are a must, and it is a significant cost. So in remote work projects, I've seen the commitment to buy 10,000 headphones so that people can actually be on a call without tons of background noise. A good headset should minimize and cut out background noise. It's very important. And as a part of that, I found using an on-the-air sign is really important. If you have a home office and you want to stop your spouse or children from barging in on you, there's inexpensive, in the range of $30 or $40, digital on-the-air signs that has a remote control. You park this thing outside your home office, and you can turn on the air button. So when you're on a remote meeting, you can tell people, everyone outside will know, and it minimizes the interference and interruptions. And these are the little touches that make remote work better and improves the experience, makes it more usable. These things, I'm not saying them because they're nice to haves, they really make a difference. Then you got to provide the access to the applications and data, and test every one of them beforehand if you can. Otherwise, test them immediately afterwards if you have to. Work through all the issues of those that don't. And the issue is, so I do a lot of assessments for very large organizations. A typical 100,000 person organization that I go into has between 1,500 and 3,000 applications that all run the business. And this doesn't scale down fast. Even a 100-person company will have a couple hundred applications they rely on at least. Many, or most, need to use them in remote work. Despite that, key insight for you is you focus on the core 20% of apps that most workers use. Right, plus anything mission critical to keep the business running. Test those, make sure they work. There's all sorts of surprising edge cases, especially with VPNs, where applications won't work as expected until some testing and configuration is done. There's also some new types of applications. The state of the art in collaboration is evolving very quickly on the edge. Here's an example of three. There are hundreds of other examples like this, but these particularly show how you can preserve the feeling of being in the office. One is Sakoko, and I've used this on several projects very effectively. It creates a virtual office overview. It's a visual in the browser. You can see offices, and everyone gets an office, and there's meeting spaces, and you can click on which one, and suddenly you pop in, and your webcam and your headset work suddenly, and you're only talking to the people in that office. Right, it automatically maps it to whoever's in that virtual dedicated office. So you can get your own office, and people can drop in and drop out, or you can even block it if you want to. It really is effective at kind of bringing part of that in-office experience back. Then there's Mural, which is a great application that it's a visual collaboration tool. It's like a whiteboard, a shared whiteboard, right? And it gives you this very high bandwidth direct connection to teamwork, right? You can use it like a canvas for flowcharts, diagrams, and so on. Very effective used by creative teams, but I find that it's extremely effective at creating a shared artifact that you're simultaneously working on, even though everyone's in their own home or wherever they're located. And then the last one is just kind of as a thought provoker is Status Hero. It's an application that answers the question is, all right, how is everyone right now? What are they doing? What have they been working on? And it centralizes the status of workers so that a cohesive team picture emerges automatically. And it queries workers periodically on what they've done recently and asks questions and then surfaces that data in a very consumable dashboard type way so people can see what's going on right now, right? They can't walk around their office anymore, but this allows them to kind of get that situational awareness. And also will broadcast major events and achieves goals automatically so people know what's going on. It'll even pull activity from key systems. So it will say, hey, this project just got completed or this milestone was just reached. So it's really neat. This brings back, in fact, improves on. This is why I was saying that you can actually improve on the in-office experience by creating better tools during remote work that will hopefully address the gap that exists sometimes with working remotely. So develop effective remote working skills. So as soon as you get that foundation in place, you need to get people the skills to work better than they have. They're usually not used to being effective only through a network connection, right? So team collaboration, enterprise-wide collaboration, dust off your enterprise social networks. Your Microsoft Teams and Slack are going to become core channels where they were nice to haves before, and get people the basic, here's a 2-minute video. How do you get the most out of Slack? So a lot of people don't know the really amazing things that Slack can do. And you can put here's the top 5 things I bet you didn't know that makes Slack much more effective for now that you're outside the office. So we'll talk about just-in-time training in a minute. Techniques like working out loud and network leadership are particularly effective. Not just building skills, but shifting culture automatically. And we'll talk about what those are. But first, be very aware of something known as the 50-foot rule. This is a piece of work done by Tom Allen at MIT, and it's been measured since his work back in the 70s. And the 50-foot rule says that workers is a finding that says that people who are not within 50 feet physically will probably never collaborate, or very unlikely. The more the separation is, and by the time you get to 50, the chance they'll collaborate is almost nothing. And that's what's so valuable about being inside that office, the serendipity, right? So workers that are not co-located strongly tend not to collaborate together. And that's really important. That's what we need. Businesses consist of teams and what they can come up with together. And when they're not coming up with things together, that's not good. So special care must be taken not to lose this. That's why I'm talking about these next 2 techniques. We need to return serendipity to remote work. So the first one is something called working out loud. And there's all sorts of analogs, like Charlene Lee has a concept called open leadership. It's similar, but it's aimed primarily at leaders, of any kind. But it's a powerful and now quite popular digital collaboration technique from the book of the same name. And it encourages workers to share what they're doing, right? Lightly narrate their work. Get stakeholders involved early and often, just like we would in an agile process. Is agile working? You start talking about what you're doing, you share your early artifacts, like here's what I'm thinking, here's what I'm doing. it's not a lot of overhead. That's what the key with the Lightly. It's a little bit of, it's simpler than email, right? Do this on your social network, do this in your team chat, and it keeps the network filled with useful business information, status, and chatter that creates that serendipity. And it's simple. It's easy to do. Teach it to all your remote workers. It takes 10 minutes, right? So that's one key skill. And that there's so many downstream good things that come out of this that's one of the, why I'm only talking about 2 skills. If you actually did this, it would solve a great deal of your skill problems with remote work. Another best practice is we have new tools that can help people climb the digital remote work maturity curve very quickly. These are called digital adoption platforms. They guide people right within the context of the work task or process they're trying to carry out, right? It can be a tool support, or it could be process support. And it consists of contextual on-screen guides and just-in-time tutorials as they attempt to do something, use a new feature, do whatever. And it also collects information on user behavior and identifies missed opportunities. They're not using this really powerful feature. You can see that in the data, and you can put reinforcements in the tool to say, make sure that they know that it's there, right? Highlight this, so they know that it can be the next step, and it's the most important one, but they're not doing it. Address that, right? And it's you can drive more usage and effectiveness of your remote work tools, increase employee engagement, and the overall value of your investment in all of this. Easy to do too. Another thing is when processes become more remote and less visible, they start to break down. Right? Intangible processes are notoriously difficult. That's why things like IT are so difficult, because it's intangible in nature and that we can't really see it. So work coordination platforms makes the work more contextual, visible, centrally managed, not by overstructuring it though, but by connecting everyone in a central tracking and management approach that is highly visible, measured, and effective. There's a variety. I maintained 2 short lists. I showed the digital adoption platforms one there. This is the work coordination platform. These are the top platforms in the solutions in the industry right now. And then lastly, you have to shift your culture so that remote workers are not penalized, which they often are because they're not considered as important. So there's this automatic denigration of remote workers. Even though there's companies like ADP, they have 22,000 remote workers. So works effectively for them, but they tend to be lower level workers. And so that's a significant issue. So top executives and line workers are actually least likely to have the mindset to more openly collaborate, engage, and accept help. So line workers often don't feel empowered, and top executives feel like they have to already know everything. So teach network leadership skills. Lead by example, right? Show people how you want them to behave when they remote work. So overshare until you can get the right level. Instead of undersharing, tend to overshare, for example. Take great examples of teams and people doing wonderful things working remotely, and storytell them. Make the whole company understand what good looks like, right? So, make poster children out of the great examples you hear about. You have to go looking for them, and do this early, widely, and often. And it teaches people, it sets the tone and establishes the culture, and you can get people to help you. There's lots of folks who want to be in the forefront of driving change in their organization. Get those change agents to help mentor, teach, and advise people who are maybe less willing or less prepared to do this. And that brings us to network leadership. It is something I've been writing about for years. It's the ability to engage and drive influence at scale while working remotely. Basically, now that we're only connected to each other over the network, we need a way of saying, well, in-person leadership, we actually teach that, right? You can go to leadership school and understand that, but we don't teach the techniques of how to do this. Even though it's actually more effective, you can lead far more people at scale through a network, right? We see what, top CEOs, like Richard Branson and Elon Musk, what they do with their connection to millions and millions of people, not just their workers, but their customers as well, right? Network leadership, we see it all the time now because it's a natural thing that will happen when we're all connected this way, just we don't teach any skills around it. And when you do that, good things happen. And the Corporate Executive Board issued a report recently that says this is the most lacking skill today in managers, right? As more and more work goes digital. So teach managers and executives its vital skill as soon as feasible. I have a guide on network leadership, easy to find online, that will help you get started there. So this is something you do this after you do the other pieces. We have to deal proactively with the disadvantages of remote work. Usability, is going to be one of your biggest issues. It's just going to be too hard. Fix that. Also, many workers will find remote work very isolating at first. Others will just not have the skills to be effective, right? Especially managers who don't want to be seen flailing around in front of everyone in the organization when everything suddenly changes, because that's where we are, right? So, recommendation: provide and scale up mentoring, support, and just-in-time training. And those digital adoption platforms can be the thousands of instructors you need sitting inside everyone's computer, helping them just in time, right? There are ways to scale these problems now that we didn't have before. Also, software vendors have created very convenient support kits. A little self-serving because it's usually going to be using their tools, right? But they're filled with useful information. The employees have kind of swarmed together and said, well, how can we use everything that we offer to make remote working easy? And they're pretty compelling, easy to find as well. So Microsoft, Smartsheet, Dropbox have all done this, and the content is quite good. And they have templates and all sorts of things for many of the things that I talked about. And others have done this too. So I encourage you to look at those as well. All right, so what can you do next? There are some things that you can do. You can get a professional remote work program assessment. Have someone come in who's done this before and say, all right, so here's your gaps, and here's how to close them. I also offer online on-site workshops. Say, all right, let's take all these best practices, and I've skimmed across them. You could probably sense there was a lot more to each one of these, and there is. Get an on-site workshop about this so you can get going fast and address all the things that really provide the productivity. Giving people the tools and the access is just the start. It's all the other pieces that make the real difference. And if you're a remote work vendor, get an evaluation and scorecard on how well you do remote work. Don't forget, join me and other innovators at our famous Constellation Connected Enterprise, CCE. I have the 2019 date there. I don't remember the 2020 date, so I apologize. But we will now take a few questions about this topic. If you have, I see the chat looks pretty busy there. Let's go ahead and pull some of these here. All right, let's take it from the top here. So what are the preparations we should be considering in case we have to shut down our offices? So the preparations are to make sure that foundation's in place. And do that checkout, a remote work checkout. Get started on that. You have time to do that. There's a good chance your offices will be shut down. Almost every tech company has already shut down their offices, and now the schools around the nation are doing it. So it's coming quickly. How do we best support our leaders and managers in case we have to transition to an all remote workforce? I believe I've addressed some of that. There's everything from just-in-time training to storytelling, to working out loud and network leadership. These can be put in very consumable guides, how-tos, 2-minute videos, and those digital adoption platforms can deliver that training contextually all throughout the worker experience, right? So, and will there be a copy of this slide deck? Absolutely, we'll post it in SlideShare shortly. All right, going through the questions here. Lots of good chat in the chat, I see. I am interested in your view on using the current situation to onboard more employees on Microsoft Teams if you're in the process of rolling it out. Absolutely. You have to get your leaders to use it as a channel, as a primary channel. Say this is probably the lightest weight, least disruptive way of communicating digitally, right? You do it at scale and bring our enterprise applications in. It's a great situation to onboard more employees. But I would just look at it, do it with, and I know that tool owners are very protective of their tool, but this is a time to think big about our organizations. This is an opportunity to make sure that we're using the right tools for the job. So what I really recommend is say, give every employee a cheat sheet of all the situations that they should use what tool for and when. So use Teams for this, use Yammer for that, use email for this, right? And discourage using email, by the way. That's still by far, I just saw some data. Email still drowns out all the other tools in terms of volume. If you add up everything that all the other channels have in a typical enterprise, email still beats everything, right? Single largest market share. and it shouldn't be that way. It's an old 30-year-old technology. So get people on, you need to get more people on Teams, but it's not the only option. I would say teach everyone what channel to use and when. Are there security concerns with Slack? Not too much. It is about the same level of security concern with every other channel that you have. Okay, go through. The CCE 2020 is October 26th to 29th. Thanks, Aubrey. Appreciate that. Which remote access tool works best under limited bandwidth conditions? Look at that team viewer. It's designed for small businesses operating under some of the most constrained conditions. I would look there first. The other ones are good, but they're heavyweight. They tend to have more overhead. TeamViewer can work on the weakest device that you have with the poorest bandwidth connection that you're aware of. So that's a good place to start. John Reed. In my opinion, one really important point here is that not just working out loud, but helping people understand their tone. Yeah, that's a great point. I believe most people run cold in written environments like email and messaging. Yes, they don't the emotional context it gets dropped out. Helping them warm up their tone so as not to alienate people. Yeah, people tend to look much harsher in writing than they do in person. That's why we have emoticons, by the way, and they're so popular these days. But a lot of people don't use them, and certainly in business context, they're not really considered acceptable. And that is a shift in culture that should be considered. And John says conflict resolution still matters remotely. Yes, I've actually done a lot of work trying to unify global corporate cultures and these types of tools, and it's very, very difficult. What's acceptable in Russia isn't acceptable in India or in North America, and these open channels, all sorts of things happen that you'd be surprised to see. However, the good news is I found that within a month or two, most of those issues are resolved. Do you want to elaborate on your view of email? In my opinion, new tools tend to go through a honeymoon phase just because they're not yet heavily used. Once they're in heavy use, they tend to have the same problems as email. So there is a tendency also to use the old tools like use the new tools like the old tools. And for example, I was just reading a Microsoft Teams assessment that says that people use @mentioning way too much in Microsoft Teams, creating floods of notifications, and they tend to @mention teams instead of just people. So there are ways actually with these new powerful tools to spam people. So there are common sense usage standards. I mean, what we've really seen is when common sense and clear direction are given to workers, saying only @mention individuals or teams in the following situations. Because there are these new tools, while lightweight, right, don't require a subject line. You just start talking, right? They're even less structured, if anything, than email. They can be used to create far more volume if they're misused. So it's like the CC problem in email, but it can actually be worse. Next, I think we're pretty much okay. How do you recommend introducing working out loud to a company? So one of the most popular ways is something called working out loud circles, right? So you get some people, forward-looking people that you think will model it well and are very interested in doing it. You get them doing it well, right? And once you get them doing it well, then you can start using that as a model. Say, look what these folks are doing over here and how they're doing it, and emulate it. So I would create those pilot groups. I wouldn't create one because you don't know how it's going to turn out. I would create. You usually see multiple wall circles, working out loud circles in an organization. And then once they're starting to do things better, and it's clearly and obviously better, then you can start using that as an example, saying, yes, our organization and our culture can do it. Yes, it's better. And here's why. And again, storytelling is so important in these intangible ways of working, like remote work and working out loud. So, create those explainer videos, those two-minute snippets that show people what they're doing, making them tell the story and help them storytell. Usually people doing something great, subject matter experts are terrible at their own storytelling. You have to do it for them. So that will help you introduce it to the company. All right. So interesting point here in chat. For more senior executives, it's so difficult to get used to using Teams that they will stop using almost any collaboration tool altogether. I don't know if that's necessarily true. what I find is that senior executives are so busy and they're so inexperienced at using the tools that they get frustrated easily. There's too much to read and sort through. It's not designed for people who have that problem. I remember Jive Software, the enterprise social networking company, created a What Matters guide view for executives to say, here, of all the conversations currently happening, here's what matters most to you. And it was a pretty good guess. And I've seen that one large multinational I work with, they built a special application on top of Yammer that was designed just for executives, right? So it found that senior executive adoption problem so critical, I guess it really is important. And the condition was so poor that they built a special way for executives to engage, right? So I'm looking forward. I'll get an update on that, and I'll share that story soon. Simon Fogg, working out loud circle guides include content on style, tone, empathy, but you could do, he suggests one guide per day. There are 12 weekly guides. And yes, consumability is what we've learned. Micro learning is the phrase that's often used. People are very busy and they have deadlines and responsibilities, and micro learning is a way to get inside their schedules and boost them a little bit every single day. So that 12 weekly guides idea is great. Make it very, very consumable. It makes a difference. So I think we're at the end of questions, and I appreciate those that have stuck around. We still have quite a few participants online. I appreciate this. You can see all my coordinates there. I'll be continuing to talk about all of this over the next few weeks. Have updates, kind of a roundup on everything that we've learned. I have some fantastic, amazing new data I'm getting from the vendors about how, the tremendous surge in remote work that we're seeing, and that's just the beginning, I believe, based on what we're seeing. So thank you for joining. Stay safe and healthy out there. I assume we'll be seeing a lot more of you online these days. And we'll post the slides on SlideShare, slideshare.com/dhinchcliffe. So same as my Twitter handle. It'll also be posted on my Twitter handle so you can quickly get them. Thank you for joining.